Greetings. My name is Richard Lundy. I'm the founder of the Father and Son Connection and also the founder of the annual Father and Son Celebration, which was an outgrowth of the historic Million Man March back in 1995. The reason that I got involved in doing this was I had an opportunity to break the ice with my son, who I had abandoned when he was born, and came back into his life when he was 25 years old. If you could imagine what that must have been like, coming into a young man's life at 25 when he was a college graduate, had been a high school and college star athlete, very intelligent, had a good job at one of the major investment brokerage firms here in the city. And also had purchased his own home. So what could I offer him? So that was a major challenge for me, but I was up for the challenge, and I'm here today to say that I won. So that's kind of the backdrop for me. And I'm in the studio this morning with a young lady that I've known most of her life. And I've watched her grow into a beautiful woman and a professional woman and an active woman. She doesn't take a whole lot of mess. So I'd like to introduce her to you this morning. I'd like to introduce you to today, Jamila Muhammad. Welcome. And thank you for coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Mr. Lundy. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to just talk through what, birthed the Father and Son celebration that we are going to be relaunching this year.
Well, let me tell you, it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy, but as I had mentioned, one of my mentees contacted me and let me know that there was a major event coming up, and it was going to be a march, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Minister Louis Farrakhan, thanks to them, they came up with the idea of doing the Million Man March. And I was excited about it because I missed the 1964 march, and I planned on making it to this march. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity for myself and my son to try to connect. And so I found out that they were taking a bus. I got tickets to go there. I asked my son very hesitantly and reluctantly, but he said yes. And I was just real excited about that. On the trip up, we were excited because we showed videos of like Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael, and so the young guys were getting some history on the way up.
Yeah.
Some of the things that stand out in my mind about it was to see as we approached D.C., we were approaching D.C. probably like about 5 a.m, and all you could see was cars filled with brothers. Brothers was hanging out the car windows, yelling and raving at each other and whatever. But one of the most impressive things was when we rolled up to one of those bus stop restaurants where all those Caucasian males were in there. And when we walked in there, they froze. They had never seen that many powerful, strong black males. And so that was one of the standouts for me. But anyway, the event was fantastic. I had a wonderful time. I have lots of pictures of the march. And so what happened is that when we came back, we talked about what we were going to do when we got back. The minister told us, get involved, go to voter registration, run for political office, start your own business. We had some marching orders. And so I took that very seriously. And so I thought that would be a great opportunity for me to say, take hats off to brothers who do the work, brothers that are out there in the ditch, doing the work of raising their children.
Yeah.
Because back in 1995, brothers wasn't getting a whole lot of holler. We were kind of put down a lot. So I felt that we needed to do something to lift brothers up. Because there are brothers that do the work, and I wanted to commend them. And so I said, let's do a father and son celebration. We were probably the first city in the United States that ever did that, that celebrated African American fathers and sons. And so that was kind of what I really wanted to do, and that's what we've done. And we did it for 15 years straight, and it was very successful, and I have a lot of material about it. I have testimony from people that went, and guys still ask me about it. When are you going to start it back up? So this is what we're going to be doing, is we're relaunching it for this year, and the anniversary date for the Million Man March in October.
That's going to be great. And like you said, you were doing it for 15 years. You're relaunching it this year. As you've been doing it through the decades, fatherhood has changed. These young men and what they face have changed. And so how has your approach to help them had to change with it?
Well, again, it was something that because I'm an educator, one, and because I had so many nephews, 13, and 2 sons, I had a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And so my oldest nephew is 6 years younger than me. Okay?
Wow.
So I've seen him from birth to senior citizen. Okay? And then if you go all the way down, I've seen my youngest nephew is 42. I've seen him from birth to 42, and I've seen the changes that they go through. Now, there are a lot of similarities, but there are changes.
Yeah.
And so you have to make that kind of an adaptation.
Yeah.
And I've been able to do that very successfully.
And I know that you are very passionate about mentoring the young men and the youth today. And are you seeing that the problems or the challenges that they're facing are the same as it's always been, or are they facing something new?
Well, they're facing something new, and I wouldn't want to be a youngster today based on what my experience was growing up. But basically, fundamentally, they're the same. From the standpoint that when I was doing some intervention work out at Whitehall Yearling in Reynoldsburg, I had about 20 young males that I was working with, and the same kinds of problems are: one, the inability to read, the inability to do math. Okay, they're over extended into sports. That's their whole life in sports, and now the cell phones and the social media, those kind of things. So those have changed. That's changed, and it's changed the dynamic. But again, the same things. I did a survey with the youngsters that I had, and I asked them what were the major problems that they saw in growing up, and it was the same: girls, sports, job, and dealing with parents. Those were the same kinds of things. So that's kind of where I put my hat when I'm dealing with them. I stay in that area. I don't get all out into the social media stuff necessarily.
Yeah.
There's a good book out about Gen Z, the anxiety of Gen Z, and I've read that, and it's been educating me a lot about the social media to be able to talk intelligently about that to these young guys. So yes, they've changed, and it's very challenging for them. And I don't think a lot of parents realize, because they think the schools are the same as they were when they went.
Yeah.
And they're not the same.
Not at all.
One of the things that I've shared with young parents is that they should go down to the school board and demand that they have a day that every parent in the public school district should spend a day in the school. Yeah. And they would get their eye full. They would be like, "Oh God, I didn't realize that." Because I every time I went into one of those high schools last year, the year before, every time I went in there, I was shocked at the stuff that I saw. And I said, I know parents don't see that, because if they saw that, they would be coming in these schools and talking about, "Hey, what are you guys doing in here?" The worst place that you can go in this public school system is the teacher's lounge. I refused to go into the teacher's lounge when I worked in the school, because all they do is talk about the kids. Yeah. Negatively. Yeah. They're not talking about solutions. They're not talking about how we can help. They're talking negatively. And so when you go in, like I went in, I'm a changer. I want to see some change. Yeah. And of course, I got a lot of resentment from the teachers. Okay, so not the students, the teachers. The kids were coming into my office all the time. Because my position is you have to feed them. You have to give them the knowledge and information that they need at that time. Yeah. And the schools are not addressing that.
And how do parents help with that? I think too, when we're talking about especially fathers and sons, emotional vulnerability is the one thing that we're seeing a lot right now when we're talking about mental health, talking about opening up, we're talking about being vulnerable. And so when you're talking to both the sons and the fathers, what does that look like?
Well, the good thing about that for me is I've learned a lot. and one of the things that I've learned is I've learned about myself. And that's what the schools don't teach us. They don't teach us about ourselves. So I approach it from the standpoint of I put together a course called Self-Mastery. And it's how to deal with self. And so to me, when I start talking to these youngsters about self-mastery, it's broken down from the standpoint of it's you, it's me. There's no different. My age is different, but we have the same issues. I talk to them about the male ego. I talk to them about conscience. What is conscience? I talk to them about will. What is a will? I talk to them about balance. I talk to them about those kinds of concepts to get their attention to focus on themselves. And so once they do that, then I approach them from a historical perspective. I start talking to them about African history. I get quotes from famous authors, from famous historians, all the way back to the Greeks, all the way back to Kemet, all the way back that. And that's what they want. That's really what they want. They want to know about themselves. And so I start sharing books, videos, whatever else that I can share with them. So that gets them open. And so now once they find out something about themselves, they're ready to take charge. They're ready to take charge. Now they know who they are. They got some idea of who they are. And so they get involved. I start talking to them about being active in student government in school. A lot of those guys didn't even know they had student government. They didn't even know nothing about it. I said, no, you need to, if you want your voice heard, that's the place to go. If you want your voice heard, get into that. You can talk. So, those are some of the things that we did.
And the Father and Son celebration, I think it's very adamant that you use the word celebration in the title. Why is that something worth celebrating?
The reason it's worth celebrating is because fathers are so important in the child's life. And society has painted it like, no, it ain't important. Fathers are an afterthought. You have young ladies talking about, we don't need a man. No. It's very important. Fathers have a very important role. And my thinking in terms of celebration is to make that, for us to reclaim our rightful place in the family. We're kind of on the outside. We're unemployed. We got child support. We're kind of on the outs. We got to step up. Okay, we got to step up and lift up. And so with the Father and Son celebration, to me, we're able to do that. When they come to that Father and Son celebration, what we did, our agenda was we'd have two speakers. We have a youngster from 21 down to like 17, if he was willing to stand up in front of all those guys and talk. Whoever wanted to do that, we'd get young guys to talk. And the beautiful thing about that was two guys in particular I'll talk about. One, a young guy, he looked like he was probably about 15 years old, and he stood up and he talked about his relationship, or wanting a relationship with his father, who was incarcerated. Now, how many young guys have that? And he started to cry. And everybody was like, why is he crying? And he said the reason that he was crying was because he reached out for his father in prison, and his father rejected him. Okay, so now you got all these youngsters in there, they get to hear that story. Then the other guy, a year later, another guy came in. His father and I were childhood friends, and I took his son because I knew him, and I said, you can talk. He got up and he cried. And so I'm really taken aback. I'm like, well, why is this guy crying? And the reason he was crying was he said he felt sad because of all of his buddies, none of them had a good relationship with their father, and his father was his best friend. So now if you can imagine 15 years of young people coming in there hearing 15 different stories, now you can look at your father and say, well, my dad ain't so bad after all. This cat over here, he was, my dad is not so bad, So that was one of the major benefits. The other major benefit was we always had a raffle. And we had a raffle for youngsters 12 and under, and everybody won something.
That's good. Yeah.
Because a young kid can only tell you what it's like not to win. When everybody else win, you know what that feels like.
Yeah.
I didn't win nothing. So we made sure that every youngster, they got to come up, they got to say what school they were in, what grade they were in, so they had an opportunity to show themselves in front of men.
Yeah.
And that's rare.
Yeah.
So those were two of the major powerful pieces for us. Now, we started out on Saturday morning, we did workshops. We would have workshops for fathers and sons. We had workshops on financial investments for father and son.
Yeah.
We had workshops on custody rights. We wanted to have workshops that gave these youngsters and men something that they could use when they left.
Yeah.
Not just a feel-good session.
Yeah.
You're right on, that brother had a good speech and everybody. No. We're talking about helping to solve the problems.
Right.
And that's what the celebration is about. At the end of the year, we're celebrating what our accomplishments were for that year.
Yeah.
And so we get to see our young guys coming in there. They didn't have their pants sagging. They were dressed properly and whatever. And we laid out the meal for them because brothers are hard, brother. If you got some shaky food, they're gonna dog you out. So I had to pay top dollar for the caterer, and she laid us out. She did it for 15 years, and we never had any problems with that, and everything was just great. So, that's why we want to celebrate.
Yeah, and I think too, when we hear the word father, mother, aunt, uncle, I mean, especially in our community, a father could be someone that's just been in my life for, as a mentor. And so does it extend to that? Is it someone that's just a father figure in my life? Is it open to everyone in a familial sense?
Yeah. And we had a number of single moms approach me, and they would say, I ain't got nobody to take them, whatever. I said, you can bring them. Just bring them and drop them off.
Yeah.
We'll sit them at a table with a group of people that got fathers and sons at that table. We'll sit there and we'll take care of them.
Yeah.
And so we did that. And then the other part of that was, for those, I know because I was a single father, a lot of single fathers don't know what to do when they get their kids. If they get their kids on the weekend, they don't know what to do. They want to watch football and smoke weed or drink or whatever. That's not what you want to do with your son.
Not at all.
Okay, so what better way for a mother, if she had a guy in her life and he wasn't involved in a child's life, she could say, I just got these 2 tickets. You need to take your son to this thing.
Yeah.
And once they took him to that thing, that would be an eye-opener for them. See, because we always had speakers that spoke to our weaknesses as brothers. That's what I wanted people to talk about, is not, we do everything right or whatever, but where are we still struggling?
Yeah.
Where are we still struggling? We're still struggling with trying to survive in a system that is anti-us. But a lot of us don't know that. So we fall victim to that. We fall into selling drugs, and that's what they want us to do.
Yeah.
So we have to re-educate these guys.
And you had mentioned too this level of initiative that's really needed from both father and son. And so how does that kind of conversation enter the father and son celebration?
Well, at the first father and son celebration, one of the things that we did was we put pencils and paper on each table. And before we ate, we took some time and said, okay, we need to come up with our own definition of what a man is, because we keep operating out of the definition that the European comes up with. That doesn't fit us. That doesn't fit us. So we keep trying to fit into that, and we keep coming up short.
Yeah.
So young guys say, well, what the heck? I don't need to do anything because I can't do that.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that we did with that. And then like the other thing, one of the things that came out of the father and son celebration was my son and I wrote a book. And we talked about how we were able to reconnect. And that was a major part of it, of us being able to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And being honest with each other. Trust and honesty are the biggest drawbacks for brothers because our egos get in the way, and that's why I love to do workshops on male egos, because brothers got to get that together. That's our Achilles heel.
Yeah.
That's it's getting us into all kind of trouble. You know what I'm saying? With the law, with our families, with our women in our lives, with our children, all of that stuff. So that's one of the reasons that when I teach that self-mastery, I can teach it to men and boys.
Yeah. And then another question I have for you, too, is when you're talking to these young men, especially these young dads, do you feel and have you experienced that they're taking your word a little bit more seriously because you've been in their shoes? And what kind of mentorship has that looked like, where you're saying, I've been where you are, I've experienced, leaving my son and then now trying to get that relationship back? What does that look like? What do those conversations look like?
When we have those conversations, I tell them about that, they sort of just sit there with a dumb look on their face, like, okay, that's not me, I'm not doing that, that's the stupidest thing you could have did, But the thing about it is that my mentees, they'll all tell you, and I have them on video, and they tell you, said, one of the things about Mr. Lundy, Elder Lundy, that we really appreciate, he was transparent.
Yeah.
And he was vulnerable, made himself vulnerable. And men don't like to do that. And I don't have a problem with that. I was just telling Miss Heath today, I said, when I was a young guy and I'd go out on a date with a young lady, I'd tell her, I said, I can't open the ketchup bottle. I don't have strength in my hands. I can't do that. I ain't embarrassed about that. That's, So when I relate to young guys, I relate to them based on what I was like at that age that they are.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying? How that, I'm not coming from I know everything, I did everything or whatever. I just go back and remember, what was I thinking about when I was 16 years old?
Yeah.
And I know what I was thinking about. I tell them, I said, I was thinking about girls. I said, but see, you guys have major distractions that I didn't have. I said, because girls can wear almost anything at school. When I was going, girls wore long skirts, so you couldn't see jack. But you could your imagination went there, your imagination went wild. I know, So those are some of the kinds of differences that they find humorous, that they get the message.
Yeah.
They get the message. And I use a lot of anecdotal material. And, I use a lot of shit myself as and some of my nephews. I had one nephew and I tell him I call him the hoodlum priest. Because when he was around my mom, and his mom, he acted nice, but when he went in the streets, he was a thug. So those are just some of the things that we did. And I see we're getting over time here. So
yeah, I just want to ask you one more thing, and I think this is the most important, is why now? Why bring back this celebration now, this year?
Well, again, like I said, I've been in the schools and I've watched these young guys, and it just hurts me to my heart to see them dealing with the same issues.
Yeah.
The same issues, that we can do something about it. It's not that, like one is if your body is a temple, we got to teach boys and men that they can't go out just laying with every female that they come in contact with. We got to get them to value themselves, and if they can do that, that's going to cut out a lot of problems.
Yeah.
That'll cut out a lot of problems for us, but that's the main stumbling block that we have.
Well, thank you so much for having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk to you about this really important celebration. I'm excited to see it come to fruition.
Hey, I'm glad you came on and talked to us about it. I'd like to give a shout out to your parents, because they did a fantastic job, thank you. And they deserve it. And we will be posting photos, some of the video footage from the previous father and son celebrations. Some of the guys that we honored 15 brothers from the community that many people will know them that have transitioned now. So we'll be on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and I look forward to seeing every brother that's alive attend this father and son celebration come October the 22nd. 2025. We already have a place. I'm not going to tell you where it is. It's a fabulous place, but I'm not going to tell you where it is. But we're going to look forward to seeing you guys there. And thank you for listening to this clip, and look forward to seeing you.